Hi, I'm Liam Karen, and this is Architecture Topics. Today we're headed to northern Spain to tell the story of how a struggling industrial town, a restless architect, and a risky political bet came together to create one of the most audacious museums of the modern era. Today we are going to be talking about the Guggenheim Bilbao Museum and how this building didn't just give the city a new cultural icon. It gave it a second life. But do me a favor before we dive in. Follow the show, Architecture Topics, on your favorite platform if you haven't already. Cool. Now let's begin. In the mid-20th century, Bilbao was many things. Gritty, gray, and hardworking. An industrial powerhouse for Spain. Its core industries were steel production and shipbuilding. For decades, the city thrived on the back of heavy labor. Cargo ships lined the docks, and factory smoke hung in the air, with the Nervion River, dark and industrial, as the spine of it all. But by the 1980s, the city was in decline. The shipyards were closing, steel production was collapsing under global competition. Unemployment soared, and factories shut down. The river, once the artery of Bilbao's economy, became a symbol of its decay. Toxic, smelly, lifeless. And beyond the economy, there was another layer of tension. This was the Basque Country, a proud, fiercely autonomous region with its own language, its own traditions, and a long history of resistance to central authority in Madrid. The 1970s and 80s were marked by political unrest, bombings, and the shadow of ETA, the Basque separatist group. So, by the early 1990s, Bilbao had two enormous problems: a broken economy and a broken image. But there was also something stirring under the surface, a quiet resolve to change. Local leaders weren't dreaming of flashy architecture yet, but they were thinking about infrastructure, about cleaning the river, revitalizing old docks, building a subway, and improving the airport. At that time, their goal wasn't to attract tourists, it was to give Bilbaínos a reason to believe in their city again. But somewhere along the way, someone dared to dream beyond mere reconstruction. What if they didn't just rebuild Bilbao? What if they reinvented it? The city was already working with engineers, economists, and urban planners to come up with this recovery plan. The focus was practical. Clean up the river, improve public transport, and modernize the port. That was the plan. Until the Basque regional government got word that the Solomon Guggenheim Foundation, based in New York, was looking to expand. At the time, the foundation was led by Thomas Krenz, a man with a taste for scale, spectacle, and disruption. Krenz wasn't your typical museum director. He was ambitious, sometimes controversial, and deeply focused on turning the Guggenheim into a global brand. Under his leadership, the foundation was looking for new outposts. The original Guggenheim Museum in Manhattan was no longer enough. He wanted satellites, bold ones, in places that would shake things up. But, let's face it, Bilbao was on no one's list. Still, the Basque government saw an opportunity. They reached out, meetings were held, and slowly a proposal took shape. But Bilbao's leaders knew that if they wanted to compete with other global capitals, they had to offer the foundation something it couldn't resist. Here's what they came up with. What if Bilbao built a new museum, entirely funded by public money, and the Guggenheim Foundation ran it, lent it art, and gave it its name? That was the pitch. And it worked. The Basque government agreed to spend over $100 million to build the museum, and another $50 million to help develop a permanent collection. The building would belong to the city, but the Guggenheim Foundation, based in New York, would control the brand, the programming, and the expertise. It was a bold kind of partnership, Not a franchise, not a handover, more like a cultural joint venture. To many, it sounded crazy. Why should a struggling city spend that kind of money on a museum, especially one filled with international art, for a population more used to steel mills than sculptures? Some worried about giving so much cultural power to a foreign institution. Who would decide what got shown? Whose stories would be told? But the vision was bigger than just art. The idea was to make the museum a catalyst, a symbol of change, a statement to the world, and to Bilbaínos themselves, that the city was not going to fade into the past. It was risky. It was controversial. But the Basque leaders moved forward. And then came the question, who could design it? At first, Bilbao wasn't thinking of Frank Gehry. In fact, the shortlist included several big names from the European establishment, architects with reputations for sleek, modern museums that looked the part. Refined, elegant, expensive. But remember, this was a partnership with the Guggenheim Foundation. And who was leading the foundation? Thomas Krenz. Krenz had seen what Gehry could do. He admired his work in California, like the curving chain-link forms of the Aerospace Museum in Los Angeles. And more recently, a radical office and house complex that Gehry had designed for the Bacardi Company in Mexico. There was something unpredictable about him, something raw, and Krenz liked that. Gehry wasn't a household name yet. He was well respected in architectural circles, sure. But he was still seen as a kind of outsider. Too sculptural for the mainstream, but too unconventional for big institutions. Yet maybe exactly right for this one. So Krenz invited Gehry to a meeting in New York, and he was quickly brought into the process. He flew to Bilbao, walked the site, and tried to make sense of what this building could be. The proposed location was tricky, squeezed between the river and a highway overpass, surrounded by industrial remnants and steep hills. But Gehry didn't see a limitation. He saw a chance. Back in Los Angeles, he started sketching. Not drawing floor plans, but quick gestural sketches, almost like scribbles. He worked by feeling his way through the form. To help translate those forms into something buildable, Gehry's office turned to a powerful piece of aerospace software called CATIA, developed by Dassault Systems in France. Originally used to design fighter jets, this software let Gehry model curved, free-flowing shapes in 3 dimensions with precision. It was the first time a major building had ever been designed this way. That software changed everything, because now he wasn't limited by conventional drafting. He could let the forms twist and bend and fold, like metal caught in the wind, and still know how to build it, down to the millimeter. And the material that brought it all together? Titanium. Lightweight, durable, and almost alive in how it caught the light. Gehry tested dozens of finishes before landing on one that shimmered. Not like a mirror, but like fish scales. It gave the building movement, texture, depth, a way to reflect the clouds, the river, and the city around it. The design took shape, not as a box for art, but as an experience, a building that would make people feel something before they even stepped inside. Still, it looked insane on paper. And when the people of Bilbao saw the first models, many thought the same thing. What the hell is that? The backlash came fast. Some called it absurd. Others called it reckless. Locals nicknamed it El Barco Varado, the stranded ship. People said it looked like it had crashed onto the riverbank. A few wondered if it was even finished. Some critics questioned whether the museum truly belonged to Bilbao, or whether it was just a shiny outpost of a New York institution dropped into a city that had its own rich history and identity. But despite the skepticism, construction moved forward. Construction began in 1993. The site was transformed piece by piece. Gehry's team worked closely with local builders. And over the next 4 years, the museum began to rise. The curves, the light, the scale. Even before it was finished, people started to realize this wasn't just a building. It was a statement. And perhaps to the surprise of many, construction advanced on schedule and on budget. In the past, a design that complex would have been almost a guarantee of endless delays and ballooning costs. Remember what happened with the Sydney Opera House, for example, which, by the way, we covered in our first episode this season, so you can go listen to that episode next if you are interested. But thanks to Katia, Gehry's team had every piece mapped out from the start. Nothing was left to guesswork. Every contractor knew what to build, how to build it, and what it would cost. A miracle for any public project. And then, on October 18th, 1997, the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao opened its doors. The Spanish king and queen were there. So were international critics, journalists, art world elites, and thousands of curious Bilbaínos who had no idea what to expect. From the outside, the building shimmered. Its titanium panels shifted in color as the sky moved, from silver to gold to blue-gray. The river flowed beside it like a mirror. The scale was monumental, and the forms felt almost alive. Inside, the gallery spiraled out from a soaring central atrium, a cathedral-like space filled with natural light and intersecting volumes. Gehry called it the flower. It became the heart of the museum and a kind of urban living room for the city. The opening exhibition featured monumental works by Jeff Koons, Richard Serra, and Jenny Holzer. Installations that felt tailor-made for the space. But for many visitors, the building itself was the real masterpiece. Some found it confusing. Others, overwhelming. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. It was unforgettable. And suddenly, just like that, Bilbao had something it hadn't had in decades. It had hope. Photos of the museum appeared on the front pages of newspapers around the world. Architecture critics called it a masterpiece. Tourists started arriving from Madrid, from Paris, from Tokyo. Some came for the art, but most came for the building. The Bilbao Effect was born. Economists, mayors, and urban planners from around the world started paying attention. Somehow this struggling port city had used architecture, not sports, not shopping malls, to transform its image, attract investment, and spark a full-blown cultural and economic revival. In the first year alone, the Guggenheim Bilbao welcomed over 1 million visitors, 5 times more than anyone had predicted. Hotels filled up, restaurants reopened, and taxi drivers suddenly had customers again. Within a few years, the museum had generated more in taxes and local spending than it had cost to build. So, of course, other cities also started wanting their own Bilbao miracle. Suddenly, everyone was talking about signature architecture, about bold forms, and about hiring so-called star architects. And Frank Gehry, once the outsider, the rule breaker, became a household name. He was asked to design buildings in Los Angeles, Prague, New York, Paris. His style, that chaotic poetry of curves and metal, became iconic, imitated, sometimes misunderstood, but always unmistakable. Meanwhile, in Bilbao, something even deeper had shifted. The city had found a new identity, not just as a tourist destination, but as a symbol of reinvention, a place where public institutions, civic pride, and a little architectural risk had pulled off the impossible. And the museum kept delivering. Big exhibitions, major artists, and global attention. But Bilbao didn't stop there. In the years that followed, the city kept building, expanding parks, investing in infrastructure, and opening new cultural spaces. The Guggenheim was the spark, but it lit a fuse that's still burning. It's easy to look at the Guggenheim Bilbao today and forget just how unlikely it all was. A post-industrial city struggling to breathe. Political leaders with bold views and the conviction to make a risky bet. A museum foundation willing to gamble on an unknown location. A maverick architect proposing something that looked like a crumpled piece of metal on the edge of a polluted river. And yet somehow, it all came together. The Guggenheim didn't just put Bilbao on the map, it redrew the map. It shifted how we think about cities, about culture, and about the power of a single building to change the course of a place. But it's important to remember that the museum was just the tip of the iceberg. It worked because it was part of something larger, a bold civic vision, years of investment in infrastructure, a public willing to take a risk, and a city ready to bet on itself. And Frank Gehry? The Guggenheim made him a global icon. But it also changed how he thought about architecture. He'd always believed buildings could move people, but in Bilbao, he proved they could move entire economies too. Since then, countless cities have tried to copy the formula, some with success, others not so much. Because the truth is, there's no magic blueprint. No single building can save a city. But every once in a while, when vision, politics, timing, and design collide, something extraordinary can happen. And that's it for today's episode of Architecture Topics. If you enjoyed it, follow the show, share it with a friend, and if you'd like to support our work even further, leave a rating or review. It helps more than you think. I'm Liam Karen, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep looking up.